Okay, all right, very good. We recorded activities. Where are we at with these? The role of the superintendent in 9 and discussion assignment, the case study. All right. Those are the two things that, do. I'm playing loose and free with the do part, but those are two that are due right now. And I just discovered to locate your submissions, smiley activity, etc. But again, I think I'm caught up, except for 3 comments about the legal issues. You post some interesting legal issues. I like the one, Brian, that you put up there about the BOCES teacher, the BOCES aide, who was sidelined, was suspended. We didn't have all the details we wanted, but that kind of pointed out how difficult these legal issues can sometimes be, jurisdictional issues, etc. That was a good one to pay attention to. Then, of course, Nate, you did your typical thorough job with your 3 cases. You did a good job, Nate. That was good. So the point is, I enjoy reading your contributions. Let's get to it. What are we doing tonight? Module 9. Define the internal and external political system of schools and use the knowledge to evaluate case studies. All right. I say chapter 2 because Dr. Bird wanted me to break these up into smaller bites, but this is really one presentation, all right? We're going to talk about good governance. We're going to talk about the relationship between the Board of Education and the superintendent. Extremely important. Please do pay attention. It's going to make or break you. Probably the most important lesson that you're going to get in this intro course. All of us have our stories to tell, and I'll try to flesh it out a little bit more and give you some examples of what this may look like sometimes when it's handled the right way and when it's wrong. Let's define the terms. They talk about the effect of internal and external forces affecting education from a political context. There are so many these days. Everybody wants a piece of the pie, from legislators to special interest groups. Millionaires and billionaires have a habit of getting their fingers in the pie. Millionaires and billionaires wind up being appointed to be Secretary of Education based upon their contributions to a certain political party. So they do have their input. The internal factors are groups or individuals who play an outsized role in policy development. All right. The locus of control is exercised directly within the physical boundaries of the organization, and you know who they are. These include school boards, administrators, parents, guardians, unions, students, of course, could be added. And in a moment, we're going to broaden that out just a little bit. But that's the internal factors. We have to be cognizant of the, I'll give you some examples, just so we know what we're talking about. A teachers' union that negotiates change the start and end times of the school day. That's a mandatory topic of negotiation. Management is not permitted to change that unless it's negotiated. And as you can tell, that's going to have wide-ranging impact on the school, parents, daycare centers, transportation. But if a teachers' union is successful in negotiating a change, that's going to have an impact on the school. What about parents that organize and attend board meetings, successfully advocate for anti-bullying policies and programs? And if you see that when DASA came out, or maybe before DASA came out, parents started to come to our buildings and advocating for, complaining about bullying going on in the middle school in particular. All right. I think do you think we're going to see parents coming out when meetings are held publicly in regards to the COVID opening or reopening? Yeah, certainly. And they're going to have a legal standing to do that. All right, because the guidelines require that. Superintendents certainly and principals have outsized influence on education policy. To be honest, a superintendent doesn't necessarily come up with a dictate. We're going to adapt or adopt the Common Core modules, but it could happen. all right? And that's going to have a wide-ranging effect. And, you know, the decisions are so many on the court. I don't know if this research still stands up, but I remember when I was a principal looking at this, finding some research that said a principal makes 400 decisions in a day. Now, that's everywhere from the ridiculous to the sublime, naturally. But those decisions are going to affect what's going on. How about external factors? Locus of control is outside the physical boundaries. And here are some of the examples. Local, state, and federal governments. All right. NYSED, certainly politicians, community organizations, philanthropists, polite word for billionaires and millionaires and their foundations, and education-related organizations like ESP, NSBA, NISCUS, all right? All of them play an outsized role in affecting what goes on within our districts and our buildings. And we're constantly trying to satisfy all the demands, sometimes more polite way would say the interests, all right? One real obvious and ongoing interest is balancing the interests of the taxpaying public against the interests of those who are advocating for student programs. Taxpayers, students, who comes first? Kind of goes back to your beliefs and your visions, doesn't it? Who was it who had the organizational chart that had above the Board of Education was the taxpayers? Remember that one? Yeah, that kind of said something to me.
So who would you appease first?
You know, the giving part of my soul would say students.
But
No, it would be students.
okay.
Given here that, good question, Jared, but given that it's important to choose sometimes and declare yourself, if you had a critical need on the part of students and it required a 25 cents per thousand increase to tax rate, students. You might lose that battle, Jared. All right, your budget might get voted down, but nevertheless, sometimes you have to know where you stand. And that's how we go through these exercises sometimes. Where do you stand? That district, obviously, Jared, made a conscious choice at some point along the line to put taxpayers first. I would tend to think it was probably a political decision to do that, Jared. There was some dynamic going on in that district that compelled the district leaders to say taxpayers will come first. You can imagine, right? Maybe
I would imagine
that
that
was
they
the
were,
Clarence one.
maybe they were shut out for so many years.
Exactly.
They needed to be changed.
Exactly. And you're right. And thank you for saying Clarence, Abby, because I think that was the dynamic. If I go back to Clarence, back 20 years, Clarence was having a lot of difficulty with passing budgets and capital projects. They were spending too much. They were growing a lot as well, if you know Clarence. But they were getting some taxpayer minor revolt, Jared, which probably resulted in that emphasis, all right? But it matters, okay? So according to a consensus study reported issued by the National Academy of Science, decision-making with the education system is in large part a political process, that we just said it, involving a number of key players. Note the importance of legislators' decision-making regarding curriculum. Tyke and Cuban note the powerful sponsors adept at persuading local school boards, state legislators, state departments, and accrediting agencies. I maintain, and I won't use any pejoratives, but I maintain, remember the Tea Party movement? The Tea Party movement, I think where we first started to see the Tea Party movement make itself manifest was at the school board level. I think that's where Tea Party people cut their teeth back in the late 90s. And if you do kind of study on that, I think you'd find that to be the case. I say that based upon the people that I dealt with on boards and their approach to the educational process and what their priorities were. Their priorities were Well, in many cases, their priorities were uh, uh, creationism versus evolution, number one, low taxes or no tax increases, and not wanting big government to get into the classroom, Common Core. Those would be my indicators looking where that political movement first started to emerge. And since the 1980s, governors acquired increasing authority and influence regarding government state level education. What about that statement right there? Today, 21st of July, does the governor have an outsized influence on education as we sit here? Kind of a silly rhetorical question. Absolutely. You see what's going on, by the way, now? Teacher unions are starting to sue governors. DeSantis is in big trouble in Florida because the Florida Teachers Union is suing him because he's declared that the state schools will reopen.
But I think that's also in large part to the fact that he's done nothing to protect anybody in the state for so many months. So now they're like, where's our protection?
Exactly. Exactly. Where's the resources? Where's the testing supplies? That's becoming a big problem again. Where are the tracing? Well, how long does it take to get a result? What about our tracing practices? Where's the PPE? All this business is just not being attended to. He would be one of the primary offenders. All right. You've got the governor of Georgia suing the mayor of Atlanta over mandating masks. He says you can't mandate a mask. I saw her on TV. She said it was just a recommendation, but nevertheless, he's suing her. So we're entering an entirely different arena now, where everybody's getting the lawyers out. And I understand in the next bill that's in front of the legislatures, federal Senate and Assembly, or the House of Representatives, there's some language, I don't know in which version, but there's language that would prohibit anyone from suing school districts if their children get sick. I think, frankly, that's on the Senate side.
I mean, I'm sorry, but isn't it? I mean, my child goes to camp and we sign a waiver saying that we can't sue. Is that the same thing that districts would?
It sounds like the same thing. Yeah. Sounds like the same thing. They're called hold harmless provisions, and it's not uncommon. All right. Frankly, I hope that does happen, Jared, that they can't sue us.
It would be a mess.
Exactly. It would be a mess. When I did a search, thankfully, of external forces in particular, leading institutions of education policy, I did come away with what I thought was a pretty comprehensive listing here that you could check if you wanted to. The study is called Influence, a Study of the Factors Shaping Education Policy. All right, and here we see groups that we're familiar with. National Assessment of Educational Progress, all right. Trends in International Mathematics and Science. I'll read it, Kelly, because it's hard to see. Teaching children to read. Evidence-based assessment of scientific research and literature. Tennessee Student Teacher Achievement Ratio. And then others, all right. Others that we're familiar with. Here's Linda Darling-Hammond, Center on Educational Policy. Here's Bill Clinton, American Federation of Teachers. All right, here's Bill Gates at the top of the list, NAEP. Here's George Bush. So, this is not a bad thing. I hope you recognize. I wouldn't say that this is a bad thing that we have these national groups, well-funded groups doing the research. It does mean that it's important to always check your sources and see what happens to be there. Because remember what the first slide said? It's a political process. These individuals have political goals and political ends. And that's what's behind their money. or I should say that's what their money is behind. So make sure that you know who it is you're citing as to whether or not they're a proper source, and if their politics or their values, their goals, their mission, their vision line up with yours. You, of course, have stakeholders in your districts. You know who they are. You have organized stakeholders. These are people who, these people will be at the table with the COVID reopening plans. These people will be at your board meetings. These will be your partners. Especially if you get to be a superintendent, central office administrator, you will have regular and frequent association with these groups. Your village, town, city, county, state legislative district officials, absolutely. You'll be on a first name basis with everything from your local mayor and assembly people all the way up to state senators and state legislators. All right. You will visit them. They will visit you. You will have their telephone number. You'll call them by their first name. All right. There are a lot of civic groups in our communities that have a vested interest. The Lions, the Kiwanis, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts. All right. The local Chamber of Commerce. We're not supposed to be religiously inclined, but certainly we have religious affiliates. All right. Most of the leadership and most of the staff do attend churches in our districts. All right, we share services sometimes. They use our buildings. All right, what we do matters to them. We have cultural institutions. We have social agencies, especially at the county level. We have parent groups and boosters. Other education like BOCES are important partners. Higher education, business and industry. You could probably think of more to add to the list, but we have organized stakeholders and we have unorganized groups, all right? As opposed to PTAs, we have individual parents and their guardians, property owners and taxpayers. They might be in an organized group. They might be part of a tax pack, it's called, all right? You might have childless families, senior citizens, students, all right? Organized and unorganized stakeholders that have a stake in what we do and can become part of the political process, especially when resources are tight or when controversy envelops a school district. Like in my case, Casey or Abby, when the board compelled me to cancel the lacrosse season. Told them not to do it, Abby. Not a good idea. Maybe I should have died on my sword, but died on the sword for that one, Abby. But I said, all right. Abby knows what happened. Lost some tail feathers there. If we look at it graphically, you can see all the forces surrounding the school. And this is just within the district. We could, I jumped ahead. We could have, these are the internal forces. These here are just the internal forces here inside the school district, all right? Out here is where we get the external forces that we mentioned earlier, all right, that came off of this slide. So there's a lot going on. It's a complicated political milieu that we're involved in. And I'd like to suggest to you that if you don't pay attention to it, you're going to get blindsided. You have to know where the power centers are, especially within your community. You need to know who rules the roost. All right. What board members have outsized influence? What members of the teaching staff, even if they're not members of the union leadership, which teachers have an outsized influence? I did some work in a school district where teachers who were not even members of the leadership team, the union leadership team, had a direct line to board members and were whipping the board members around. Not good. Makes for really poor governance. You need to know that. So I guess the word here is if you're not keen on politics, then you might want to just remain a building principal and not get into the superintendent's level. Because even at the building level, the politics can be sketchy at times. If you're in the superintendent's level, the politics can devour you. All right? If you don't know where the power centers are and you don't know who's exerting influence, all right? And all of it has to do with governance, all right? Any questions there with the first part?
I don't have a question, but you had made a comment on my post about the superintendent being the one who has to be aware of all the external factors, and the building principals just worry about the building.
Yeah,
And I see it in my district, which is why we have the deputy. The deputy worries about the education part, and the superintendent worries about the political part. Everything from the DEC testing water to shopping centers being built in the area to, like you pointed out, the senior citizens. So I
yeah.
can see how it keeps just growing outward.
Good point. And I'm glad you brought up the comment because it does apply to this situation. Um, if you're a good superintendent, you try to protect your principal from all of that. Because the principal's job, you know, everywhere from discipline to is there enough milk in the cafeteria, to bus problems, to curriculum instruction, assessment, alignment, handling parent issues, and all of those things are enough to drive any good principal crazy. So you want to protect your principal from the outside influences if you can. And in fact, it's your job to, all right? It's your job to do that. The best partnership is when both parties, the principals and the superintendent, know where one begins, one's authority begins, the other one ends, Jared. Because then you're doing good tag team, so to speak. And a principal's not saying something that she shouldn't. And then the superintendent would have to clean it up later, which is where relationships come from, and sharing the same values and beliefs makes a big difference. Very good point, Jared. Thank you. So let's talk about the relationship with the Board of Education and superintendent. I'm not going to talk about the relationship between the principal and the Board of Education because it's not that keen. It's not that deep. It's not that they don't have a relationship. But to be honest with you, as I go through this, I want you to realize the building principal and the Board of Education should not have much of a relationship. It should only be in passing and on a personal level. And this is why, so that I don't jump around. The principal works for the superintendent, not for the Board of Education. All right? In fact, everyone except remember the organizational charts? Everyone except the district clerk and the district treasurer work for the superintendent. And that means that's your chain of command. You really don't want your principals to be playing footsie, to use a term, with any of the board members. And you have to train your principals in that, because boards will try to compromise that chain of command, and principals will try to play the political game to undermine you, all right? Or even out of their own ignorance, they don't know what they're doing. So I made it a point, the lesson I'm about to give you, I made it a point to quote unquote train, not berate them, not yell at them, but we had training sessions in my meetings for one good reason. Being a small district, the principals were new and not experienced, and they needed to know these things, right? So I would train them about the things that Carl Christoph was training you in the video that you viewed, all right? And we would talk about this lesson right now.
Can I just ask one? I'm sorry to interject again.
You always can interrupt at any time.
Where does the PTA in a building like fit into all this? And I know they're not the Board of Ed, and I know that they're not, but we have I'm in my building, strong parent presence.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's like that in a lot of places, but I see Chelsea nodding in agreement. But this, like, the board will hear of what is happening in the building. The principal tries to mitigate that and appease the parent. Is it the superintendent's job to intervene in that case, or just the building principal?
Well, under normal circumstances, and in the best case scenarios, it should be the building principal. So ideally, Jared, you want your PTA to be providing with financial support, input, kind of a screening function, input from what other parents are thinking, a feedback loop. You want them to perform that as being a feedback loop for you. You would like them to also be ambassadors because you can meet with them more frequently, elaborate upon, share your thoughts. This is why we're going in this direction or that direction. And hopefully, if you have a good work relationship, they do become your ambassadors. And one of them talks to 7 of them, who talks to 7 more. Now you got 49 people. So you use them certainly in a positive way to help you communicate your intentions, all right, etc. A superintendent would only get involved, or should only get involved, when that breaks down. Because an effective principal will have that all under control. All right? Did I answer your question? I think most of us would agree that we tend to find our PTAs most strong and effective at the elementary level. They get a little bit more weak as they move through the middle school. And then by the high school, not so much of anything. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Just think about the developmental levels of kids. 16-year-olds do not want to see their parents come walk in the building and being best friends with the team. No, it's just not something you do. They're on their own by this time, right? It makes sense. We shouldn't decry that fact. Now, we're talking about the superintendent's relationship with the Board of Education. It is a marriage. Like it or not, it's a marriage, which is why I recommend highly researching your district and your Board of Education before you propose to them. And propose is another term for apply to them for a job. Do your research. I did not do my research when I applied to Fredonia. I was running away from, I'll say his name, Ken Conley, who was the superintendent of Lake Shore, who replaced Bill Houston. I knew what was going to happen. I had been there for 9 years. It happened. I lasted about 3 months, and I didn't research the district. I glommed onto the opening, the opening within the BOCES region, all right, without doing my homework. I served 3 years, and then we divorced. All right? It is what it is. Your relationship and working culture with the Board of Education will make or break you. It will. Carl said the same thing. Remember, he said it is the most important relationship going on in the district. It is a professional marriage built on the same principles as a personal marriage. Tell me if this is not true. I think all of you are probably married. Trust. Kelly's giving me a no. Well, pay attention, Kelly. Do your research, Kelly. It's built upon trust, sharing of duties, all right, respect, mutual goals and objectives, and two-way communication. I've been married for something, well, I've been married since '82 and together with my wife since '73. So I got, what, 47 years under my belt? I think those apply. Anyone care to add to that? Because maybe, anyone care to add to that? What does a marriage depend upon?
My wife always told me to just keep my mouth shut, so.
Well, you know, that's interesting. Let me tell you a story too, Jared. Abby, when I would go to Board of Education meetings in Lakeshore back in the 90s, Bill Houston, who I love and is still alive to this day, that old booger, all right, he's still alive, still living in Angola. Bill was a great guy, all right? Bill would go through board meetings and not say very much at all. And the board president was a domineering, we didn't get along, all right? Well, I didn't cross it, all right? But he was a very domineering guy, very loudmouth, very foul-mouthed too. Bill would not speak during the board meetings. And I wondered why that was. And there's probably 2 reasons for that. One, you want to get out of that board meeting before midnight. And 2, it's a board meeting. As long as they're not taking you someplace you should not be going, let them talk. So, Jared, I think there's some wisdom in that. And I have a big mouth, and I oftentimes had to bite my tongue and just let them run their meeting. And I would speak up when I would see them going in a direction that was either illegal, unethical, unwise because we couldn't follow through it, or as I said a moment ago, I once had to advise the lacrosse boys got in big trouble, and I advised the board not to do what they wanted to do, which was to cancel the season. I just wanted to suspend the boys who were bad. And they said, no, cancel the whole season. All right. And we blew the place up. We were on the local news for 2 weeks. And to top it all off, the board reversed my decision, which was their decision, and never said anything about it. So yeah, Jared, knowing when to hold your peace, absolutely. Knowing when to speak up, absolutely. All right, it's a very important relationship. I can't value how important it is. So in this 38 1-minute video from Carl, did you like Carl? Can I say outright, I love Carl. I wish I could be more like Carl. He's such a gentleman. He's so refined. He's so intelligent. He never loses his cool. When he's about to stab you, you would never see the knife coming. He's so good at what he does. I just love him. I try to learn a lot from him. And Carl would give this presentation to the Erie County School Boards every year. He'd be invited to do it. And Carl and I got to be very close professionally. And he was very kind to do this for me, let me videotape him in his office and do his presentation. And now the university has rights to it, as it turned out. But I don't mind. Carl's wisdom needs to be shared. So let's take a look at that. His accomplishments are outstanding. He used to be a JAG. You know what a JAG is? In the armed services. Jared, can you JAG? That's a military lawyer. What does it stand for? JAG, J-A-G. Do you know?
I can't remember. I'm sorry.
Might it be? Someone Google it. Judicial Adjutant General.
I just remember it was a TV show at one point.
Yeah, it was. So you win the responsibility. Google it.
Doing it now.
What is a JAG?
Judge Advocate General's Corpse.
Judge Advocate General Corps. Good. Thank you. Thank you. He was one of those. List of best lawyers in America. He used to be the Buffalo City Schools chief counsel, and now he's older than me. He's older than Mills. He's probably about 74, 75, 76, and he's still chief counsel for the Rochester City Schools. I just love him. I really do. Notice what he said. There's no doubt in my mind that the board's relationship is the key to the effectiveness of the school district. Absolutely. Here are some of Carl's truisms. And I'll go through them relatively quick because you got it from Carl, but I'm just going to give you some of the instances, all right? The state is sovereign. You have no inherent powers. Everything comes from the law. I'm going to show you where that comes from, all right? There are types of school districts. If you were to go take my previous advice to you and go to Cornell Legal Information Institute and find your way into Title II of New York State education laws, you would find these sections. And you have school district organization, school districts, common school districts, union-free school districts, central school districts, central high school, boards of cooperative ed, school districts less than 125,000 inhabitants, more than 125,000 inhabitants. Do you ever wonder why you're called a central school district or a union-free school district or a small city school? This is why, all right? It's because it's embedded in the law. I'm not going to read each and every one of us, right? And here's a description that came from this site. So here's the legal reference if you wanted to check. And inside here, you will find these, this screen is a synopsized version of what's in the law. Because to be honest with you, the law is written relatively confusing. For instance, union-free school districts, they have a lot of detail about union-free. And then when they talk about central, they won't enumerate the roles and responsibilities for central. It'll say in Ed Law 1701 or Ed Law 1726. It was forcing you to refer back to the other one. So it gets kind of messy, which is why I gave you this. All right. So now you know why you're called what you are. And inside of those laws, you will find the powers that have been delegated to these different types of school districts. The dates when you have your annual meeting, your budget meeting, in the law. The date when you have your votes, in the law. The size of your school boards, in the law. All right? When you'll have your organizational meeting, in the law. All of it's embedded in the law, and now you know where it is, all right? We used to have central high school districts. We still have some across the state. We've got some in Monroe County. These are school districts. And in fact, Chautauqua Lake might be approaching this right now.
Yeah.
Right, Brian, where you accept elementary school students from other districts?
Yes, we accept them from Ripley, and yeah, we might be expanding more too.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you're technically called Central High School District, but it's reminiscent of this organization. All right?
I live in Suffolk County and I work in Nassau County. I didn't know that existed.
Central High School Districts provides secondary education to children from at least 2 common or union-free districts, which is what Brian was just mentioning. All right? Now, this was as of July 2011, only 3 existed. It's 2020, that was 9 years ago. We have to be careful of our sources, but this is just meant to be for reference purposes, all right? Talk about BOCES. Well, a supervisory district is a BOCES, all right? All except for Jared and Brian and Nate, the rest of you and me were all part of Erie 2 BOCES, that supervisory district. It used to be actually it was Erie 2 Chautauqua Cattaraugus BOCES now. It used to be Erie 2 BOCES. And Chautauqua Cattaraugus had a separate BOCES. And then they merged. And they became one supervisory district. So there's a BOCES district superintendent who is the boss of all the 27 component school district superintendents. And that supervisory BOCES superintendent gets half of his salary from the state education department and half of it from the component school districts. That's how that works, all right? Describing the BOCES again. And then lastly, charter schools. All right, so it's here embedded in the law that defines their authority, 822. Corporate entity, this is important to recognize, all right? Individual board members have no authority. They can only act as the corporate body. That's why if you have a 7-member board, it takes a vote of 4 members to pass a resolution. Even if you only have 4 board members in attendance, it still takes 4 board members to vote to approve a resolution. Individual board members have no authority. Why do I emphasize that? Because you may encounter a school board member who will walk into your building someday and say, I want to visit Abby Fateric's classroom. I'm a board member, I'm going in. I would train my principals, no, you are not going in. You'll have a board member who says, I want to come into the central office and want to look into Brian Bongiovanni's personnel folder. Why? Because I'm a board member. No, you can't. So you got to have some cojones here and some chutzpah to say no. You have to train your board. Otherwise, think of it otherwise. You have chaos. Now, are you going to lose some tail feathers? Yes. Might you lose your job? Yes. But what are you going to stand for? Something or nothing. Here's another situation, corporate entity. You'll be in a board meeting, and you'll be talking about, I don't know, any type of an issue, and one board member will say, I think we need to have a study on that. I'd like the superintendent to meet with XYZ, put together a report, and get it ready in the next 2 weeks. Now, what's wrong with that picture? Go ahead, Jared. I see that figure up. What's wrong with it?
Wasn't that just one person, what one person wanted?
Yeah. So imagine if you let that go. Every time, I mean, you've got your own workload as superintendent, right? Imagine if every board member could give you orders. Now, how do you handle that? I had a method that worked. I would say, that's a good point. And I would turn to the board president and say, Mr. President, is that what the board wants me to do? And because my board president and I worked well together, we had a relationship, all right? He was experienced. He would either say no, or how does the rest of the board feel? Now, if the rest of the board, if 4 of them said do it, I'm in. Typically what happened is none of them would say anything and say, fine, I'm not doing it. I wouldn't say I'm not doing it. I would just let it slide. They knew what I was doing. I wouldn't do it.
Are board rules universal? Because I saw that online. I don't know if you posted it. There was a link to a book. It was like the handbook on being a board member. It's like, so you decided to become a board member. And then it just, is it like universal stuff?
Universal in the sense that it's embedded in the law. So as Carl is saying right here, a school board is a corporate entity. That's the law. Now, in training sessions, things like the New York State school boards and Erie County school boards in this region will have training sessions for new school board members, and they will tell them this. Because in fact, they'll go to this type of a board, this type of a presentation, Jared, and Carl will tell them this. Now, they will want to disobey this all the time because a lot of them are renegades, but you have to develop norms, and you have to be strong enough to establish, reinforce, and sometimes punish if those norms are not followed through. Here's another example. A school board member comes into the office, comes into the business office and say, I want all this extra data, all this financial data. I trained my school business officials to say, no, we'll see if the full board wants it. Or we would prepare it for everyone and make sure everyone got it. So we would kind of be the judge and the jury, myself and the school business officials. It's not that bad. We've already got the information, but we're just not going to give it to Chelsea because she came in barreling in the meeting wanting it. We're going to give it to everyone. Because Carl says later on, what you do for one, you do for everyone, right? What you do for one, you do for everyone. So you've got to treat them as a corporate entity, and one board member does not rule. And it takes some, again, experience, I'll say, all right? I can tell you when I worked in West Valley, I disobeyed this repeatedly. We had a board member who was, he was brilliant. And he wanted my evaluation to be based upon certain measurable objectives. All well and good, but the mistake I made is that he would ask me out for lunch and want to get my read on whether or not I would agree to that. I never should have done that. I did keep the board president apprised. He knew what was going on, but I could have handled that better. I never suffered a bad consequence for that, but in retrospect, I was too new. I still didn't know that. I should have done a better job. No individual authority to act. Superintendent is appointed by the board. Superintendent is obligated to the state. You will take, oh, there's a young Mr. Carson looking so handsome tonight. I see you. I see you. This is past your bedtime, young man. Superintendent is also obligated to state, you will take a oath of office when you're appointed. You should, all right? You should take an oath of office, obligating you to the state as well. Categories of the board authority. One of you mentioned, I think it might have been Kelly, things that you didn't recognize the boards had control over. But these are by law the things that they do have authority over. All right, course of study, content of courses, textbooks, oversee admission, grading, advancement, employ professional support staff, purchase leases. Yeah, all of this, all right? To be honest, a lot of this is perfunctory. For instance, in May, prior to purchasing, we would always bring new textbooks in front of the board. And they would thumb through them very quickly. But we had just been through 4 months of a review process. They didn't really care about that. Because when they have trust in you, and as long as you've got the money, they're going to let you do it. But I'll tell you, science, right? Science people, Kelly, you got board members who are interested in creationism. They don't believe in evolution. You could find yourself being challenged by boards regarding the textbooks that you choose. Kelly?
I've never seen it happen, but bring it.
Good for you. She's showing that she's got the chutzpah. All right. It could lead.
Are you telling us that you believe in science, Kelly?
The word belief doesn't appear in science.
That was just a quote, yeah, by, I forget his name right now. It doesn't matter. Okay. But these other things, certainly, to appoint staff, to terminate staff, to discipline staff, make contracts, prepare the budget, adopt the budget, establish policies, adopt bylaws, rules, absolutely. Notice the authority of the superintendent, though. The board can't do these things unless the superintendent recommends. All right, so there's a checks and balances there, which goes back again to the sharing of duties. Superintendent implements and enforces, all right? This is a good slide, and many of you mentioned that in your reflection, because Carl said that the board focuses on the ends and the superintendent on the means. Superintendent talks about the way to get there, and the board is what you want to attain. You might say that the board is the vision, and the superintendent is the mission. We talked about vision, your long-range goal, what you want to look like, what you want to achieve, and the vision is how you're going to get there, and then specific goals, measurable objectives, etc. So this gives you a real clear idea of what a board is going to do. A lot of this right here is established by policy. What we're going to do, why we do it, how well we do it, standards, all right, how much. Anything that has to do with money has got to go in front of the Board of Education, all right? Notice the superintendent, though. It's operational. How we're going to do it, when we're going to do it, where we're going to do it, who's going to do it, all right? This all makes sense to all of you. Notice that the board concentrates on vision, goals, and policies, but there's a caveat here. These days, collaboratively established vision and goals, all right? These days. Back in the day, we never conferred with anyone. Prior to the shared decision-making regulation that came through in the 80s, rarely did school boards or superintendents confer with the community. We just didn't do it. And then we had shared decision-making, and Albany required us. And you know what? It was a hard pill for many to swallow. I was at Lakeshore at the time, and I remember distinctly those conversations, all right? But if we have vision and goals, notice the superintendent, objectives, plans, and action, all right? And when we know these demarcations, these differences between our respective roles and responsibilities, it makes for a much nicer marriage. Okay, appointment of teachers, administrators, staff, it takes two. Principal his team would interview and come up with people that he wants to recommend to the superintendent. In our small district, I always made sure that I met with the finalists, because I wasn't going to recommend a teacher that I didn't know. all right? Because I had certain things I wanted to accomplish with the teaching staff, all right? If they couldn't decide, I might interview the final two. More times than not, I simply went with the recommendation of the principals, all right? Because I kept my hand in it. Because, you know, one of the most important things you can do is the staff that you hire. But it takes two. Only your recommendation to the board will result in a successful appointment. And this is where you're going to run into problems as well, because boards are going to want to employ people in the community, district residents, until they don't like that family. And then all of a sudden the district resident doesn't matter anymore. And they'll keep you going back and forth, back and forth. Do you want me or do you not want me to hire district residents? So communication with the board is really important, all right? Regarding probationary people, I've always made sure that even though someone's probationary period ended on June 30th, I started the conversation with the board in March. And I would bring in the principals in executive session. We would talk about all of the people, all right, who are on probation and whether or not we were going to keep them for another year, recommend their termination, or recommend their tenure. So that when we got to the board meeting, where the board action took place, everybody knew what we were doing. No questions. And everything went through with no problems because they knew where we were going. Collective bargaining is all done by the superintendent. All right, you can have board members at the table, but never have a majority of your board at the table, because the PERB says that if the board members sit at the table, and if you have 3 board members at the table of a 7-member board, they're a minority. But if they vote at the table that they approve the tentative agreement, they may not reverse that vote. When you go into the board meeting to vote on that tentative agreement, there's 3 votes right there. You may not go back on that vote. That's what happened to Buffalo City Schools years ago, decades ago. Board members sat at the table, they approved the tentative agreement, they went into the board meeting, and they changed their vote. You can't do that. That's a loser every time. Suspension of employees, again, the superintendent can impose it, but only the board can make it stick. All right? Legal proceedings, of course, you keep your board apprised of these all the time. All right? You do not surprise, never surprise your board. All right? Never surprise your board. It's 8:36. Let's talk about micromanagement. This is really, really difficult for a lot of new superintendents. We've got board members flitting around left and right, going to meet with principals, meeting with teachers, teachers calling up board members on the private line, everybody being the boss. What do you think that makes you look like as the school superintendent?
Not the boss?
Yeah, laughable is a good term. Laughable, it gets very confusing. Your authority is diminished. And you've really got a cluster going on here, right? And we're talking about good governance. Remember, all of this is about good governance. So you've got to avoid micromanagement. A building principal has to avoid micromanagement. There are certain things the principal decides on, and that's the way it is, all right? Same thing in a district. There's a chain of command. You can't let the board start micromanaging the hows, the whens, the whos. In other words, the means. When you start getting your board involved in the means and not just the stating the ends, then you've got micromanagement problems. And rarely will you survive those. Because sooner or later, you're either going to get fed up with it, or you're going to have chaos and you're going to have to start looking for a new job. And to avoid micromanagement on part of the board, again, you've got to be polite and assertive and sometimes fall on your sword, or use another stretch for metaphors, confuse my metaphors, lose a couple tail feathers because you've decided to stand on principle. No, we're not going to do it this way. Board members are not going to be part of the team that evaluates teachers. They're simply not going to do it. That's my job. That's what you hired me for. I'm not going to do it. So I'll ask you rhetorically, you will have plenty of times where you're going to ask yourself, if I do this, I'm going to lose my job. Am I going to do it? It's going to come up. Executive session gets abused too often as well. There are only, as Carl mentioned, 8 topics for which you can go in executive session. There are too many boards that whenever the conversation's a little bit dicey or uncomfortable, they want to go in executive session. Case in point, let's say the enrollment is declining in your school district, and you've got maybe 5 elementary schools, and you know that you can't support 5 elementary schools, and you know that you need to cut that down to 4, maybe 3, a board will say, well, let's go into executive session and discuss school closures. Can't do that. That's public information. It may be uncomfortable, and you might be criticized. School logos, school mascots, Kelly, let's go to there. All right, some of you are talking about school mascots. All right, well, now we're going to recess executive session and talk about the school mascot. Why? Because board knows it's going to get uncomfortable. The board knows it's going to get ugly. They don't want to air that laundry in public. You can't, it's not an executive session item. Only matters which imperil public safety or may disclose identity of law enforcement agency or informer, or are related to current or future criminal prosecution or imperil law enforcement. All right, those are the reasons. Or if you're talking about personnel reason, all right, a legitimate personnel reason. Here you go. Proposed pending or current litigation, collective negotiations. That's legitimate. Medical, financial, credit, employment history, or employment, of parents, teachers or staff. Preparation, grading, or administration of examinations, that's obvious as well, because you might be giving away some information about the tests. These are the reasons. Now, I found that as a superintendent, there were plenty of times where I had to advise the board, that's not an executive session item. Now, thankfully, the 12 years I spent at Gowanda, they started to recognize that I was assertive on topics like this, and there were plenty of them who didn't like it, but the majority of the board did, and that's all I cared about. I just had to have the majority with me. All right, I just had to make sure that the majority were with me and would support me, because they knew that we would lose our governance if we didn't follow these rules. You have to, otherwise it's chaos at 841. Or sale acquisition of property. Okay, Carl's wise. Transparency is important, but so is the do more harm than good rule. All right. The employment contract of the superintendent. First thing I want to say about that is, if you ever get a job in the Rochester City Schools and a superintendent and Carl Christoph gives you the board a contract and they give it to you, don't accept Carl's contract, because Carl is negotiating on behalf of the school district. He's not negotiating on your behalf. So he's going to try to reserve all the rights that the law permits for the school board, because all contracts are not created equal. All right. On the other hand, you would place a call to NISCUS, your State Council of School Superintendents, and they will give you a template of a good superintendent's contract. But your employment contract is extremely important, all right? More and more these days, we see employment contracts, which, like I mentioned in West Valley, do mention measurable objectives that they want to see happen. Buffalo City Schools does that with their superintendent, all right? It's been trending for about 20 years now. But they should have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Many contracts actually reiterate the law. They will outline the superintendent's roles and responsibilities as outlined by the law, all right? But my advice to you is make sure that you do not sign any contract that's put in front of you by the Board of Education until you've studied it. Best advice, if you can't get in touch with NISCUS, contact the BOCES superintendent and ask him or her if this is a good contract. They will be your advocate. You might even, if it's being handled by a search consultant, ask the search consultant to take a look at it. And they would give you some advice because they're all retired superintendents anyways. They will give you some advice. But the contract really matters. Things like evergreen clauses, things like the difference between being dismissed for cause or just cause. All of those things matter, all right? The number of sick days, the number of vacation days, the number of personal days, all right? All of that matters. 843. Absolutely, we talked about this. It requires a lot of communication, trust and confidence. Notice this, the board has one employee, you. You are the board's one employee. Everyone else works for you. You have to work hard to preserve that, the sanctity of that truism right there. Technically speaking, and Carl will agree with this as well, you know the contracts that you have between yourself, between unions and the Board of Education? Technically speaking, those contracts are between the unions and the superintendent. The boards fund them, F-U-N-D. The boards vote to fund them, to approve them. The contract is negotiated between the superintendent and the bargaining units. Tone at the top, respectful, reasoned, honest, open, transparent. Back to ethics. Let's talk about, well, I gotta go fast because I want to talk about this. Clear and timely communication. Carl talks about beat the kid home. In other words, what he's talking about, if something bad happens in school, get on the phone and call every board member. Call every board member so that they know before they hear it over the scanner, because they do that too, before they get it from a PTA member, all right? Make sure that you beat the kid home. There are policies that you'll find in some policy handbooks regarding the superintendent, the board relations. If you're doing a scan of the district, see if there is one. All right, it's going to be in the 4,000s. Check it out. See if there is one. Now, this is real important. The role of the superintendent facilitating the board agenda. It's going to be your show. It's the board meeting. It's the board agenda, but you set it as a superintendent. You're the only one who knows everything that's going on. You work with your team to set the agenda, and you have to keep track of it. You have to keep the board informed, and you have to make recommendations about daily operations. You are the one, along with the district clerk, who prepares the agenda. Now, I would tend to think that even in large city schools like Buffalo, the superintendent is preparing the agenda. Delegating a lot of it, but certainly preparing it. What happens for most of us, however, is that I'll just speak for myself. I would keep a tablet. You can do it digitally these days. And as things happened, I would write them down. In fact, I had a template, a board agenda template. And I would, over the course of 2 weeks, I would simply collect in that document everything that had to happen. All right. And on or about, if the board meetings were on a Wednesday, the previous Wednesday, I would start to formalize all of the board resolutions. And I would work with the school business executive and my district clerk and secretary to get all of that together. And that's what's happening in your rural and suburban districts as well. So by about Thursday, we had the second draft. And by about noon on Friday, because it was all on me, I had to have the final draft done of all the resolutions, because the secretary's got to run off all the supporting documents. She's got to put it all together. She's got to, some board members get everything, principals and other administrators get XYZ, the public gets ABC. You got to have this whole system for doing that, because we got to get it either in the mail or we would hand deliver it on Friday afternoon so that they had their agenda on Saturday. Why? So that they could have time to look at it prior to the board meeting on Wednesday. And then I was also fond of doing this. When they would bring up a question during a board meeting, well, why are we doing that? I would say very politely, well, you may recall in the board agenda that I sent to you last Friday, I mentioned that this was going to happen. And you know what the result was. It would tend to shut them up and train them to read their agendas. That's why we do this. So it didn't happen very often, but once in a while. You got to keep the board informed of events and happenings, all right? Regularly scheduled events and other things that are going on. You have to make all of your recommendations about hiring, firing, fiscal, curriculum, vendors, contracts, collective bargaining agreements, etc. Anything, everything that they have control over. And you have to prepare the board agenda. What does it look? I'm not going to go to agenda, but you hear about bi-weekly meetings or the Friday memo. Right. I'll show you what it would look like. By the way, this is a website that you can still go to. Some of this is dated. Jim Mearns was the superintendent of Fredonia years ago. He retired early, frankly, never knew why, but then he set up a consultancy and he still maintains it, but he doesn't keep all of his information up to date. But on this webpage, under the resources, see this, resources, you'll find good stuff for superintendents. Now, we don't have time to go over the 10 Commandments. What I do want you to see is what the Friday memo would look like, all right? And as you're looking at this, I want you to notice, I need to keep providing the board, I have to be a teacher first and foremost. You got to provide them with a history because not all of them remember or were on the board at the time, so you have to provide a history sometimes. You have to provide them with a rationale, data, your sources, upcoming events and details, cues as to where to look, and cues as to work of other committees. In other words, it's their playbook. Could I say that? Your memo has to be their playbook. And your Friday memo or your Wednesday memo, whatever it is, it goes along with the board agenda. It's on the top. Because it's their key, it's their code, it's their playbook for this. It's a 4-page document that describes a 4-inch pile of paper that they have to wade through. All right? So it makes good reading on the throne. Here's an example of May 16th, 2014 memo. And I would always keep it the same so that they were accustomed to following the routine. All right, it always looked the same. Now we had board subcommittees and we had board workshops that happened before the regular meeting. So I would have a heading. Policy committee meeting at 5:30 p.m. high school library. Okay, I know I got to be there. I remember that committee. Attached, please find a cleaned up copy of a policy 53rd. I made the following changes consistent with the recommendations. I didn't just make them up. They're consistent with your recommendations. At the board table on May 7th, history. And whatever they said, delete the wordy preference, delete the reference to no smoking, etc. I would keep notes, Joelle and I would keep notes of what they wanted done, because you know what, I have to admit to you, you are their gopher. You have to go for this and you have to go for that all the time. All right, you work for them. So you do what they say. So when they say that they want something deleted or changed, you do it, all right? As long as they go through the proper governance channels. Then I would have a section after that on the board workshop, because first the committee met and then the board workshop. And I would outline for them what was there too. Notice, as agreed, I'm not just making this up, board members. As agreed by you, we will work together on the board's July 1st reorganization agenda during the workshop. As you know, the workshop agenda for June 14th, remember Stephanie Kaiser? Abby, yeah? And June 18th, veterans are already booked. The agenda that requires your attention are the following. And then I would list those agenda items that would require their attention. Notice the playbook, notice the roadmap, so to speak. And I also noticed I had to give them processing time. All right. I have to know how long it's going to take to make a decision and for them to process what they have to do. So I would list the items. Not every item, just the one that required their attention. All right. I'm not going to write about everything that's just a perfunctory or pro forma decision, just everything that required elaboration. Item H8, that was going to require their attention because they have to do with minimum wage increases. I want to make sure that they know what we're talking about. Copy of data is enclosed for your review. New breakfast and lunch meal rates this past July. Talked about that, give them a history. Last time we did it is 12/13. So you have to keep educating them, reminding them, providing them with a roadmap, right, of what's on their agenda. Because why? You want them to make the best decisions possible. And you don't want your meetings to get caught up in detail. You want to try to get it done ahead of time, all right? Here's something about tuition rates. With Joelle's help, we went back in time and showed them how the tuition rates had changed over time. So they could make it, so they could see our recommendation for 14-15. Facility use fees. By the way, come to think of it, what this was all about, this was all about getting them ready for the reorganizational agenda that's coming up, meeting that's coming up in July. That's what this is all about. See, get ready for the July 1st reorg meeting. So I didn't list everything that they had to attend to here on March 14th. Or March, what it was, 14th, maybe the 20th. But things on the reorg agenda that would require a change and that they would want to pay attention to give them processing time. Okay? A new agenda item. This would make effective the authority to accept and make effective employee resignations. That's a technicality, all right? What a superintendent wants to do is if someone barges into your office and say, I resign, you want to be able to say, okay, fine, goodbye. You as a superintendent, and not have to wait for a board resolution accepting the resignation, because 2 weeks could pass. What's going to happen within those 2 weeks? So we researched it, and this means the effective date will be on the day the superintendent receives the resignation, rather than the date the formal board approves the resignation. They approved it, all right? It's a new item, all right? Then we get to the regular agenda items, and I outlined that for them. All right, Dr. Anderson, by the way, is now the superintendent of Gowanda. Good for him. He started a STEM program, okay? They had a little hiccup in the interim between me and Bob, but they worked that out. $360,000 later, they figured that out. Public information, Abby, is in the news.
Oh, I know. I remember.
All right, so just again, keeping them entirely aware of what it is in the agenda that's special or peculiar, all right? So that they have the background. Scholarships were an issue. Native American tuition contract was coming up. All right? It's 8:56. And then I always finish with miscellaneous items. This was an issue about the new tiles are coming up in the elementary school. I wanted to let them know about that we're going to tend to it, all right? And typically there were a lot more than this, all right? Just to keep them informed. And let's not forget the telephone and email too. But I'll close on this because I think I'm close to the end. In Gowanda, for instance, we had an 86-year-old board member, love her, Mrs. Martindale. But Mrs. Martindale didn't know computers. So she was not going to accept board minutes via digital. So we had to do, and by rightly so, we had to do all of the board agenda items in paper copies so that Mrs. Martindale and every board member got the same thing. You have to treat them the same. If they will all agree, and I think they probably do now, if they're all agree to go digital, then that's fine, and then you can use digital. But you can't differentiate. So you've got to find a way to keep everybody equally informed for no other reason but the best reason, so that you have a sound system of governance, so that the politics happening in your district are sound. You don't have undue influence by individuals or groups, but the proper people are having influence on what's going on, all right? It's 8:58. Finish with this. If you want to give you one more reason to work in shared governance, all right, either with your board or with your stakeholders, because if you get yourself in trouble and you're on a list, Albany's going to require it. All right, participation of parents, teachers, school-based planning, and shared decision-making. Shared governance, all right? Part 100.11. What do you know? He got through it at 8:58. Any questions? I'm sorry I talked so much.
No picture today at the end of the slideshow?
What's that?
No picture at the end of the
Oh,
slideshow?
no picture. No, I forgot.
Oh, you missed last week too.
I'll bring it
Well, I
up.
saw it.
I'll get some
I heard
Oh,
it.
you saw last week's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another.
Good,
I'll
good
come
topic.
back. Thanks, Jared. I didn't know that it was a fan favorite.
Oh yeah, it was good viewing for Saturday night television.
All right. Well, thank you, friends. It really is great to spend time with you. You're very